The jungle was alive with sound, every leaf, every branch, every blade of grass seemed to hum with the energy of life. A subtle breeze whispered through the trees, stirring the vibrant colors of the alien plants and flowers that dotted the landscape. The sky overhead was a swirling mass of purple and orange, the twin suns dipping low and casting long shadows across the ground. It was a place that could only be described as an untamed paradise. But for Captain Erica Vance, it was a nightmare. "Are we sure this is the right place?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow as she scanned the dense jungle around her. The lush vegetation was nearly impenetrable, towering trees with thick vines hanging down like natural curtains. Her boots sank into the damp soil with every step, and the humidity clung to her skin, making her feel like she was trapped in a swamp. But it wasn't the oppressive environment that was bothering her. It was the fact that they had arrived at the wrong planet. A low chuckle came from behind her, and she turned to see Lieutenant Ryland Derrick, her second-in-command, smirking as he adjusted the rifle strapped across his back. Ryland was tall, with shaggy dark hair and a perpetual gleam of mischief in his green eyes. Despite the tension, his easygoing demeanor was a stark contrast to Erica's usually stoic nature. "Don't look at me," Ryland said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I just do what I'm told. Besides, I'd say we've got the right place. It's just that the coordinates might have been a little off." He winked. "You know, human error and all that." Erica shot him a glare. "This isn't a joke, Ryland. We're supposed to be picking up an important cargo shipment for the Federation. If we don't get the supplies to the outpost in time, we're going to have a full-scale disaster on our hands." Ryland's expression sobered for a moment, but only for a moment. Yeah, I know the stakes. But we're here now, so let's make the best of it. Who knows? Maybe we'll find something useful in all this greenery." Erica sighed, staring out at the landscape. She couldn't argue with him. The planet they'd landed on, Elysium 4, was supposed to be a paradise world, uninhabited except for a few harmless wildlife species. The Federation had sent them here to pick up a cargo shipment, but after a botched landing that left their ship in a smoking heap in the jungle, they were far from their original destination. "Just keep your eyes peeled for anything that looks like a cargo pod," Erica said, already scanning the jungle for movement. "We don't have much time before those Federation enforcers start getting suspicious about our delay." Ryland grinned again. "Sure thing, boss. No need to panic." But as they pushed deeper into the jungle, the tension between them began to grow. It wasn't just the pressing deadline. It wasn't even the disarray of their situation. It was the nagging sense that they were being watched. The sounds of the jungle, the buzzing of alien insects, the occasional screech of an unseen creature, were starting to feel like an eerie chorus, a background hum to the oppressive stillness that hung in the air. Even the trees seemed to bend toward them, twisting and swaying unnaturally, as if they were being herded in a certain direction. "Did you hear that?" Erica asked, stopping in her tracks and turning her head sharply. Ryland raised an eyebrow. "You mean the weird whistling sound?" "That's not normal," Erica replied, her hand instinctively going to the blaster at her hip. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes narrowing as she searched the trees above them. The whistling sound had stopped, replaced by the heavy silence of the jungle. "Maybe it's just the wind," Ryland suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. He, too, was looking around now, his eyes scanning every shadow. "Still, if you're hearing things, that can't be good for the morale, you know?" Erica didn't laugh. She had been in enough strange situations to know that what was normal in the universe was often far from predictable. The whistling sound had been too rhythmic, too deliberate, and it had come from too high up in the trees. It wasn't the wind. The air around them seemed to grow thicker, the hum of the jungle growing louder in their ears. Erica's instincts were telling her that something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Her gaze kept flicking to the edges of the clearing, half expecting something to leap from the foliage at any moment. A rustle in the bushes behind them broke her concentration, and Erica spun around, hand already reaching for her blaster. She wasn't the jumpy type, but her training had taught her to trust her instincts. "Relax, Captain," Ryland said, holding up his hands. It's just a bird. Erica's heart slowed as a colorful creature flitted out from the brush, about the size of a parrot, with shimmering blue and green feathers. It chirped loudly, then disappeared into the trees, leaving a faint trail of glimmering dust in its wake. Not exactly what I was worried about, she muttered, but she let her hand drop from the blaster. Stay alert. We don't know what else is out there. The two of them continued their trek deeper into the jungle, the soft crunch of their boots the only sound breaking the silence. Every so often, Erica thought she saw something flicker in the trees, movement that didn't quite match the natural flow of the jungle. But whenever she turned to look, there was nothing there. Minutes turned into hours as they pushed forward, and Erica could feel the fatigue setting in. She had no idea how far they had gone, but she was starting to think that they might have veered off course entirely. The jungle was unrelenting, its endless greenery and towering trees creating a disorienting maze that seemed to stretch on without end. Suddenly, Rylan stopped dead in his tracks, holding up a hand. Erica froze, instinctively reaching for her weapon. "What is it?" she whispered, voice low. Rylan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward a clearing ahead of them, where the jungle seemed to part in an unnatural way, as if the trees had been deliberately spaced out. In the center of the clearing was something Erica never expected to see, a sleek, metallic object lying on the ground, half covered by vines and moss. It was a cargo pod. The Federation's cargo. Without a word, Erica pushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. As they drew closer, she noticed something that made her freeze in her tracks, a series of strange markings along the side of the pod. They weren't Federation insignia. In fact, they weren't anything she had ever seen before. "This isn't ours," Erica said softly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the markings. "This is something else." Rylan knelt down beside the pod, running a hand over the markings. "That's not good." Before they could investigate further, a low growl came from behind them, sharp and feral, and it was quickly followed by the rustle of leaves. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly. Erica's pulse quickened. The jungle was no longer just a maze of trees and vines. It was alive with danger. The growl was like nothing Erica had ever heard before. It resonated deep within the bones, the kind of sound that sent an immediate chill down her spine. Her hand instinctively reached for her blaster, fingers twitching with the readiness of someone accustomed to danger. Rylan, still crouched beside the cargo pod, glanced up, eyes wide with concern. He rose to his feet, his hand moving slowly to the rifle on his back. "What the hell was that?" he asked, voice barely a whisper, his expression tense. "I don't know, but it's close," Erica said, her voice steady but her senses on high alert. She motioned for him to follow as she moved toward the edge of the clearing, taking cover behind a thick, twisted tree trunk. She crouched low, trying to make herself as invisible as possible in the shadows. Every sound from the jungle around them now seemed amplified, the crackling of dry leaves and the faint rustle of branches far too loud for comfort. The growl came again, closer this time. And then, the unmistakable sound of something heavy, very heavy, pushing through the underbrush. Erica's mind raced. Whatever was out there wasn't small, and it wasn't alone. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her as the situation rapidly deteriorated. "Any ideas, Captain?" Rylan whispered, his voice laced with a bit of nervous humor that did little to disguise the urgency in his tone. Erica's eyes flicked back to the cargo pod, now partially obscured by thick vines and alien moss. If they could secure the pod and get the supplies back to the ship, they might be able to salvage the mission. But that required figuring out what was lurking in the jungle, and how to get past it without becoming its next meal. "I have a plan, but it's not going to be easy," she said, her voice steady as she assessed their situation. "We're going to need to distract whatever it is. We can't outrun it, and we sure as hell can't fight it if it's as big as I think it is." Rylan gave a dry chuckle. "How comforting. And here I was thinking this would be a vacation." Erica didn't smile. Instead, she pointed to the cargo pod. "We need to get to that. Now. There's no time to waste." Before Rylan could protest, a blur of motion darted through the trees, so fast that Erica almost didn't see it. Her breath caught in her throat as a massive shape emerged from the shadows, tall, sleek, and covered in fur that shimmered a strange, iridescent blue. Its eyes glowed with a faint red light, predatory and intelligent. It was a creature like nothing they had seen before, its elongated limbs ending in claws that scraped against the ground as it moved toward the clearing. The creature sniffed the air, its head twisting at an odd angle, scanning the area with a disturbing sense of awareness. Erica's heart thudded in her chest as the creature's gaze locked onto them for a brief moment, its eyes gleaming with something both curious and calculating. "That's not good," Rylan muttered under his breath, his hand gripping the rifle tightly. Erica's mind raced. The creature wasn't alone. A soft noise from the treetops confirmed her suspicion. There were more of them, perched above in the dense canopy, their eyes glowing faintly in the low light. "We have to move," Erica said urgently, pulling Rylan back deeper into the jungle, hoping to put some distance between them and the creatures. She didn't know what they were, but they were clearly not friendly. Their bodies were sleek and agile, their movements almost fluid as they traversed the dense jungle with ease. And the eyes, those glowing red eyes, screamed intelligence, a kind of cunning that suggested they were far more than simple predators. "Do you have any bright ideas on how to get out of this?" Rylan asked, his voice tight. Erica's mind was working at full speed. A direct fight wasn't an option. They were too outnumbered, and even if they managed to take one down, it would only alert the others. Their only hope was to outsmart these creatures, to create a diversion long enough for them to make it back to the ship. "We use the environment," Erica said, her voice sharp. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, but we need to move fast." Rylan looked around, scanning the jungle. "You mean we're going to use the plants to slow them down? Make a trap?" "Exactly," Erica replied, already darting toward a thick patch of vine-covered trees. She pulled a small device from her belt, a compact, portable signal jammer. The idea was simple: disrupt the creature's ability to communicate with each other, creating enough confusion to give them a chance to escape. But they needed to get the creature's attention first, which meant taking a huge risk. "Distract them while I set up the jammer," Erica said. "I'll need a few minutes, but you'll have to keep them busy." Rylan shot her a pointed look. "Right, no pressure. What's the plan for keeping them busy while you're off playing with gadgets?" Erica didn't hesitate. "I'll make some noise. You'll have to lead them in the other direction. I'll use the trees to get above them, but you've got to make sure they're distracted." Rylan grinned, a flash of excitement crossing his face. "I've got just the thing," he said, pulling out a small grenade from his belt. "A little light show should do the trick." Before Erica could respond, he had already pulled the pin and tossed the grenade toward the creatures. It landed with a soft thud, then emitted a bright flash of light and a high-pitched sound that cut through the jungle like a siren. The creatures recoiled at the sudden noise, their glowing eyes flashing with irritation. "Now!" Rylan shouted. Erica sprinted forward, making sure to keep her movements low and erratic, darting between the trees as she set the jammer to its highest frequency. The device was small, but it emitted a wide pulse of electromagnetic interference that would disrupt the creature's communication systems. If she could just get it close enough to their group, it might confuse them long enough to buy them some time. Behind her, Rylan continued to throw more distractions, creating a maze of flashing lights and loud sounds to draw the creatures away from the clearing. The jungle seemed to come alive with the noise, the creatures' growls and hisses echoing as they became more agitated. Erica finally reached a sturdy tree, climbing up its trunk as quickly as she could. The creatures were still disoriented, and she could hear their rapid movements as they attempted to locate the source of the disturbances. Sweat dripped down her forehead as she attached the jammer to the tree, securing it in place with a magnetic clasp. She activated the device and immediately felt the air around her hum with energy as the pulse shot out in every direction. For a moment, the jungle was eerily still. Then, chaos erupted. The creatures shrieked in confusion, their movements erratic as the interference from the jammer threw their senses into disarray. Erica's heart pounded as she watched from her perch, praying that the device would hold long enough to get them out of this mess. "Now," she shouted to Rylan, signaling him to make a run for it. Rylan darted forward, and Erica followed, weaving through the trees as the creatures continued to struggle with the interference. She glanced back to make sure they weren't being pursued. So far, the creatures were still distracted, their glowing eyes flashing erratically as they tried to regroup. The ship was still a ways off, but the trees ahead seemed to thin out, and Erica could almost taste the relief of a clear path. The creatures weren't far behind, but as long as the jammer kept working, they had a chance. The jungle was no longer just a dangerous maze, it had become their battleground. The stakes had risen, and with every step, Erica could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. But for the first time in what felt like hours, she allowed herself a moment of hope. They could survive this. They had to. The path to the ship seemed to stretch on forever, a blur of thick vines, low-hanging branches, and the oppressive heat that clung to every breath. The dense jungle was no longer the lush paradise it had seemed upon their arrival. It had transformed into a treacherous labyrinth, the oppressive humidity making their clothes stick to their skin, their muscles burning with each step as they raced against time, and whatever was hunting them. Erica's eyes darted around constantly, searching for the faintest sign of movement in the shadows. The creatures were still out there, their howls echoing through the trees, their disoriented but relentless pursuit a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Despite the jammer's interference, they had managed to regroup. The creatures were still on their trail, though disorganized, their strange, alien screeches vibrating through the air like a chorus of predatory intent. Rylan was in front of her now, moving fast, his feet almost a blur as he cut through the jungle with surprising ease. Despite the urgency, there was a certain fluidity to his movements that Erica couldn't help but admire. The lieutenant wasn't just a soldier, he was a survivor, someone who understood the art of moving in hostile environments. He'd always been good in a tight spot, and right now, he was in his element. Erica pushed herself harder, matching his pace despite the strain. Her mind raced, calculating their chances of survival. If they could just reach the clearing ahead, they would be close enough to the ship to make it back safely. The shuttle was grounded not far beyond the trees, waiting for them. The cargo was their ticket out of this jungle and back to Federation space, and if they didn't make it in time, the consequences would be catastrophic. The soft crack of a twig broke her concentration, and her heart skipped a beat. Rylan stopped abruptly, raising a hand in a silent signal for her to halt. Erica froze, her pulse racing. Every instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to blend into the shadows. She quickly flattened herself against the thick trunk of a tree, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Rylan's eyes darted around, and Erica knew that he was already assessing their situation. Something wasn't right. They hadn't been followed by the creatures for several minutes, but now they were, again, a step ahead of them. Erica heard at first, a soft, slithering noise from above. She instinctively looked up, her gaze scanning the tangled canopy above them, but all she could see were dense layers of leaves. A sudden rustle, like something heavy shifting through the branches, sent her heart into overdrive. "Not again," she whispered under her breath. Before she could react, something dropped from the trees above them. The creature was quick, a blur of shimmering fur and flashing red eyes, and it landed with a loud thud, not 10 feet away from where they were hiding. Its long claws scraped against the bark as it crouched low, sniffing the air. It was just one of them, but it was more than enough to cause trouble. The creature's head twisted unnaturally, its eyes scanning the area with unnerving precision, as if it knew exactly where they were. Erica held her breath, praying the creature wouldn't spot them. But of course, it did. The creature's head snapped toward them, its eyes locking onto Rylan first. A low growl rumbled in its throat as it bared its sharp teeth, its muscles coiling in preparation to leap. "Get down!" Erica hissed, shoving Rylan to the ground as she fired a shot at the creature. The blaster's energy bolt struck the creature square in the chest, sending it tumbling backward. But it didn't go down. Instead, it let out a screech that sent a shiver down Erica's spine. The jungle around them exploded into noise. The rest of the pack was here. A dozen of the creatures, maybe more, descended from the trees, their glowing red eyes and sharp claws flashing in the dim light of the jungle. They moved quickly, their bodies fluid and agile, swarming toward the two of them with terrifying speed. "Rylan!" Erica shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of growls and screeches. "We need to move, now!" Without hesitation, Rylan rolled to his feet, drawing his rifle with deadly precision. He fired several shots into the oncoming creatures, each blast sending one of them reeling back into the underbrush. But for every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. Erica knew they couldn't keep this up for long. "Move, move!" Erica yelled again, grabbing Rylan's arm and pulling him toward the thinning treeline. Their only hope now was to get to the ship, but the creatures were closing in, and fast. They ran, pushing their way through the dense undergrowth, the sounds of snapping twigs and crashing leaves filling their ears. Erica could feel the heat of the jungle pressing down on her, the sweat stinging her eyes as they sprinted for the clearing. The trees ahead grew sparser, but they were still too far from the shuttle. The creatures were relentless, staying right on their heels. Erica risked a glance over her shoulder, and her stomach dropped. One of the creatures, larger than the others, had broken free from the pack. It was fast, faster than anything she'd ever seen, and it was gaining on them. Its glowing eyes never left her, and Erica could feel the weight of its gaze like a physical force. "Rylan, we've got company," she shouted, her voice tight with fear. "I know." Rylan yelled back, not slowing down for an instant. He was still firing, trying to slow the creatures down, but there were too many. They needed to get to the ship. They were almost there. But just as they reached the clearing, the larger creature lunged. It was like a blur of motion, too fast for Erica to track. It crashed into Rylan, knocking him to the ground with a brutal force that made the ground shake beneath them. Rylan grunted in pain as the creature's claws raked across his chest. Blood splattered, and Erica's heart skipped a beat. "No!" she screamed, leaping forward and throwing herself at the creature with a wild, desperate determination. Her blaster was in her hand before she even realized it, and she fired point-blank at the creature's face. The shot connected with a deafening crack, and the creature staggered back, screeching in pain. But it didn't go down. Erica's breath was ragged, her heart pounding in her chest as she scrambled to get back on her feet. Rylan was lying on the ground, clutching his side where the claws had torn into him. He was conscious, but barely. Blood poured from the wounds, and Erica could see the rising panic in his eyes. "Hold on," she shouted, her mind racing for a solution. There was no time for hesitation now. The ship was only a few meters away. She could make it, but she couldn't leave Rylan behind. The larger creature took another lunge at her, and this time, Erica didn't hesitate. She took a step back, then pulled a grenade from her belt. With a quick motion, she tossed it at the creature. The grenade exploded with a blinding flash of light and a deafening boom. The creature screeched as it was thrown back, its body landing in a heap several meters away. It wasn't dead. But it was stunned, at least long enough for Erica to grab Rylan and pull him to his feet. "Run," she screamed, her voice filled with urgency. "We make it, now!" She half-dragged, half-carried Rylan toward the shuttle. Every step felt like an eternity. The creatures were still behind them, but they were slower now, disoriented from the explosion. Erica could see the shuttle up ahead, the familiar hum of its engines just within reach. They were almost there. The last few meters felt like a lifetime, but Erica's adrenaline surged as they reached the ship's open hatch. She shoved Rylan inside, then turned to face the jungle one last time. She knew they had no time to wait. Without hesitation, she slammed the hatch shut, sealed it, and made her way to the controls. The shuttle roared to life, lifting off the ground just as the first creature lunged toward them. They were safe, at least for now. The roar of the shuttle's engines was a comforting sound, the familiar hum reverberating through the hull as Erica pressed the throttle, pushing the ship higher into the atmosphere. She could still feel the weight of the jungle in her muscles, the panic still fresh in her mind. The tension that had gripped her for so long hadn't quite dissipated. She glanced over at Rylan, who was slumped in the co-pilot seat, his breathing shallow but steady. His chest was wrapped in makeshift bandages, the blood from his wounds now a dark stain on his shirt. His face was pale, his eyes closed in exhaustion, but he was alive, and that was what mattered. "We made it," Erica murmured, more to herself than to him, as the ship broke through the dense clouds and into the thin air above the planet. The stars stretched out before them, vast and infinite, a reminder of just how small they were in the grand scheme of things. Rylan's eyes fluttered open, and he gave her a weak smile, his lips curling despite the pain. "You never doubted for a second, did you?" Erica let out a soft laugh, but it was tinged with relief. "I'm not sure I'd call it doubt," she said, focusing on the controls. "But there were definitely moments when I thought we might not make it." He chuckled, wincing as the movement jarred his injured side. "Well, if anyone could pull off a miracle, it's you, Captain." Erica shot him a sideways glance, a wry grin pulling at the corner of her lips. "Just don't get any ideas about calling me Miracle Worker from now on. I'll never hear the end of it." Rylan smirked, his eyes sparkling with the remnants of his usual humor. "No promises." She leaned back in her seat, allowing herself a moment to relax. The immediate danger was gone, but the weight of what they'd just survived still pressed on her chest. The creatures, whatever they were, had been relentless. But they had made it, against the odds. The cargo they had recovered, a small but vital piece of technology, would be worth a fortune back at the Federation, and that was the only thing that kept her focused. But it wasn't just the mission that mattered anymore. The experience had shifted something deep inside her, something she couldn't quite articulate. Surviving this, working with Rylan, relying on each other in a way that neither of them had expected, had changed the nature of their bond. It wasn't just about the job anymore. "How are you holding up?" Erica asked, breaking the silence between them. Rylan gave a tired shrug, wincing slightly at the movement. "I'll live. I've had worse." "You're not fooling anyone," she replied, raising an eyebrow. "You need medical attention." "I'll get patched up once we're clear of the planet," he said. "Besides, it's not like I have a choice. This was your plan, after all. If you hadn't done that little grenade trick, I'd be dead," she finished for him, the weight of the words settling in her stomach. Rylan hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably." They fell into a quiet moment, the hum of the shuttle engines and the distant stars outside filling the space between them. Neither of them was quite ready to speak again. The jungle below had been relentless, unforgiving. They had been outnumbered and outgunned, and yet they had made it. "I don't know how we pulled that off," Erica said quietly after a while, her eyes focused on the stars ahead. "It wasn't just luck. We had to think on our feet. I've never had to use my brain quite that much in the field before." Rylan grinned, despite his pain. "That's a nice way of saying you didn't trust your instincts." Erica shot him a mock glare. "I trust my instincts just fine, thank you. But this wasn't about instincts. We needed strategy. Creativity." "Creativity, huh," he mused, clearly in a better mood despite the exhaustion. "I'm still amazed you got that signal jammer to work. And the grenade? Genius." She shrugged, allowing herself a small smile. "I've had a lot of time to learn how to improvise. You'd be surprised at what a few spare parts can do when you know where to look." "Guess that's why you're the captain," Rylan said, his voice warm with a new respect. "You think outside the box. You don't just react, you plan, you adapt, you make things happen." Erica didn't respond immediately. She wasn't used to praise, not from her crew, not from anyone. She was always the one who kept her emotions locked away, focused on the mission, the next task, the next problem to solve. But now, with the mission nearly over and the dangers of the jungle fading into the past, she felt something else stir inside her. Something human. She met his gaze, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Rylan. You kept me grounded, kept me thinking. You're a hell of a soldier." He shrugged, clearly trying to downplay it, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "Maybe we make a good team after all," he said with a wry grin. Erica chuckled softly. "Maybe." The silence stretched on, more comfortable now. They were heading back to Federation space, and while there was still plenty of work ahead, debriefing, analysis, and the inevitable paperwork, the worst was over. They had survived. And for the first time in a long while, Erica allowed herself to believe that they might actually be able to thrive together. As a crew. As a team. The stars ahead of them seemed to shimmer a little brighter now, the infinite blackness of space no longer as daunting as it had once seemed. They had faced the worst and come out the other side, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. Erica's gaze drifted to the control panel in front of her, and she allowed herself a small, contented sigh. The danger had passed, the mission a success, and they had made it out alive. "All right," she said, breaking the silence. "Let's get this cargo to the station, and then we'll figure out our next move." Rylan gave a weary nod. "Sounds good, Captain." As the ship cruised into the stars, leaving the jungle far behind, Erica felt a sense of peace settle over her. The jungle might have been their battleground, but it had also shown her something she'd nearly forgotten, that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about adaptability, resilience, and trust in yourself, and trust in those who stood beside you. And in that moment, as the stars stretched out before them, she knew that no matter what came next, they were ready for it.